Well, the act is called the Sturdy Act. It was passed in November of last year. The effective date is September 1st of this year. The act came into being because of the fact there's been this increasing problem with children, particularly children aged 5 or younger, being injured or even killed by accidents where furniture has tipped over on them. I've been a fanatic about that. I have children, I have grandchildren. I had a case where, my children have, I think, every piece of furniture in our home, short of the sofa, is screwed to the wall or the floor. One of my grandsons was in visiting with a cousin, an older chest of drawers fall over. And luckily, the two children, neither one of them was injured, some bumps and bruises and things like that. But immediately, the first thing my daughter did, and it was her sister-in-law's house, was she went, took out the top drawer of the cabinet, went out to their garage, got a drill and screws, and she screwed it into the wall. Unfortunately, the furniture tipping over has increased dramatically. And there's a lot of product that was shipped over many, many years that, would not meet these current rules.
Did you know that in the United States, furniture related accidents have tragically resulted in numerous child deaths? Starting this 1st of September 2023, the implementation of the Sturdy Act for furniture aims to address this critical issue head on. In this pivotal time, Mr. Sean emerges as the trusted expert, equipped with in depth knowledge of the Sturdy Act and its life saving implications. Join forces with Mr. Sean to navigate the intricacies of this legislation and ensure a safer future for children across the nation. The implementation of the Sturdy Act signals a significant shift in the industry. To navigate this new era of safety and quality standards, Mr. Sean guides us toward compliance and success, ensuring that your furniture surpasses expectations and builds consumer trust. Join us as we dive deep into the understanding of this act and how it will impact you and your business. This is Barriers to Break Beyond Business with Mr. Sean Slack.
So, welcome, Sean, to Barriers to Big podcast. Thank you so much for coming and sharing your knowledge about the Sturdy Act.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to be here.
I think it'll benefit the audience to start with a quick introduction about you and your involvement in the Sturdy Act overall, and then we'll go deeper into the questions.
Okay. Well, I'm a longtime furniture industry player, I guess, for lack of a better word. I've been involved with multiple wholesale companies, some retail. I've also been a member of ASTM, which writes the rules for the safety for furniture, for over 23 years, and was involved in the first phases of the Anti-Tip Over Act, which has now become law as the Sturdy Act. So I'm pretty knowledgeable about it, and a lot of knowledge in terms of construction in the factories and what it'll take to pass the testing.
And Sean, maybe you can just talk a little bit about your experience on the time you spent in Vietnam in the factory, so
Okay.
people know how much experience you have
Okay.
in really like manufacturing aspects of furniture.
All right. Well, earlier in my career, I worked for Lane Furniture, and when they had U.S.-based manufacturing facilities, and so I was in the factories on an ongoing basis. I knew what our machines could do and couldn't do. Knew how to load product into the factory to make sure the factories were productive and profitable. As everything began to shift overseas, I moved to companies that were doing international sourcing from multiple countries in Asia. I've got experience in China, Vietnam, Indonesia, Malaysia, let's see, Philippines, India, Thailand, quite a few of the countries.
Yeah.
I've been in the factories in all of those countries. And for a 3-year period, I was one of the founding partners in Folio 21 Furniture. And during that time frame, for a period of about 3 years, I lived in the factory. Pretty much 9 months out of the year, I was in the factory 6, 7 days a week.
Wow.
And so I know what it takes to keep a factory running, the problems that can happen from the simple personnel issues to, glitches in the supply chain and the ripple effect of all of those on your shipping and on your production.
Perfect. So without wasting any more time, so why don't we just jump into the act? So maybe you can just give us a general overview of the act, what product it applies to, and the requirements of a manufacturer or a distributor.
Okay. Well, the act is called the Sturdy Act, and it was passed in November of last year. The effective date is September 1st of this year. The act came into being because of the fact there's been this increasing problem with children, particularly children aged 5 or younger, being injured or even killed by accidents where furniture has tipped over on them. There's been a voluntary standard in place in the industry that's been updated several times for many years that involves an anti tip over device and a number of issues trying to help you to increase the safety of the furniture. That really was not having the impact that the Consumer Product Safety Commission wanted. A number of senators and congressmen pushed for this, and so it was passed. And after the law was passed, they were given the option of either creating a brand new set of rules or accepting the rules that ASTM had set up. And that's what they ended up doing. So the rule is under F 2057 23, which is the most recent rendering of the anti tip over rules. It applies to any furniture that could be a clothing storage unit. There's some people who think that you can just, call your piece of furniture something different, like a hall chest or a decorative chest, and you can bypass the law. And I don't think that's going to hold up. I think people that believe that are misdirected. Um, in addition, the products that are covered under the rule would be any piece of furniture that's 27 inches or taller and 30 pounds or heavier. So it applies to pretty much anything that goes into a bedroom environment. So larger nightstands, chests of drawers, door chests, all of those products would be covered under the rule. And the rule applies to sales at retail, which means that manufacturers, importers, distributors, and retailers all have to be cognizant of the regulations for compliance and making sure that they're following it so they don't expose themselves to the risk of fines
Got it.
and, frankly, of injuring of their customers.
And just because you spend so much time talking to people and meeting people in the furniture industry, what are I mean, are people aware of all the things that they need to do, or are you still seeing a lot of ignorance?
I think it's about a 50-50. The larger companies and the companies that do business with larger retailers are aware of it and understand that they have to, address it because of the fact that their customers are forcing them to address it. Smaller players in the industry, some importers, um, some distributors don't seem to have. They seem to feel like it doesn't apply to them, which is obviously not the case.
Got it. Got it. And you mentioned that the act will be applicable from 1st September. Does that mean any product that I have, maybe which I bought like 6 months back, prior to the act passing, does that also come under the act now, or is it a product needs to be manufactured post 1st September to be part of the act?
Anything manufactured from September 1st on, must comply with the act. Product that was produced prior to that can still be sold. So really, if you look at the timeline in front of us, this is the beginning of June.
Yeah.
Um, most manufacturing cycles are 60, 45 to 60 days. So the manufacturers need to be addressing this right now to make sure that the product that begins to arrive has the right construction.
Got it.
Um, there are a number of retailers who have already taken the stance that they don't want to take delivery on any more product that doesn't pass the test right now because they're worried about their inventories. And let's just say you have the exact same style in your inventory and one is compliant and one is not. How do you say to your customer, oh, yes, this is the piece that passed the safety test, this is the piece that didn't? So those retailers, are particularly larger retailers, are already insisting that the manufacturers and importers bring their product into compliance earlier. So most people are pushing to try and do it at once.
Got it. Got it. And Sean, in general, I'm. I mean, if I want to just put forward a scenario in front of you, so from a consumer's perspective, do you think the consumers will have awareness about the act? And I think the context to that is that if there are two products, and let's say one was manufactured before 1st of September, it is non-compliant, but like to the new act, but the rule doesn't apply, and it's cheaper. Do you think the consumer is still going to go for that, or do you see that changing as well?
I think the consumer is not going to have as much knowledge of the act as we in the industry do. I think the one area where consumers will know more about it is younger parents. There's a lot of magazines, there's a lot of online information that'll make them aware of this act. And as young parents, typically they're going to want to do the best and do the safest for their child. So they
Yeah.
look at things like recalls, and they look at things about new safety rules. And I think that's going to be a more informed customer. But I believe you're going to see there was a little bit of TV coverage of it when it first happened, and I think when we get closer to that September 1st date, you'll see more TV coverage on it.
Got it. Got it. So talking deeply about the act, right? So what type of product changes might be required to become compliant?
Well, the rule sets out two fairly specific tests. One is if your drawers open as a group, and the other is if only one drawer will open at a time, what they call an interlock mechanism. The interlock mechanism is very similar to what's been used in file cabinets for many, many years. It only allows one drawer to open at a time. There's a separate test for that versus the test for where you don't have an interlock mechanism involved. Um, the testing requires weight on the drawer front and a weight inside of the drawer for a load. What's going to happen, particularly on more moderately priced or promotionally priced pieces, it's going to be a struggle because their pieces may not be built to handle that kind of weight to start with. And what will happen if there's any failure during the testing, the product fails. So if your drawer guides, if your screws are too small and the drawer guide pulls out during the testing process, the piece is a fail. And you have to submit a brand new sample again to start the whole process over again. So there's a lot of work that will have to be done in the factory to take a look at the current construction to make sure that it can survive the testing, let alone pass the testing.
Got it. Got it. And in your experience, and since you've worked in the industry for so long, what ratio do you see, like with the most of the manufacturers or wholesalers? How many products do you think will safely pass the test, and what kind of segments would probably need to worry about this more?
Uh, I would say that the higher end products have a greater potential because they've been already incorporating some of those features, like the interlock mechanism for the drawers, deeper cabinets. Um, Generally, better constructed pieces have a better chance of passing the test. But that doesn't mean that a high end, well constructed piece of furniture will pass the test. There are issues that have to be addressed. You need to look at, how far the drawers extend because that affects the center of gravity. What is the weight at the back of the piece? How deep is the piece? Because a piece that's 18 inches deeper is much harder to make tip than a piece that's 16 inches deep. So again, as I said, the struggle is going to be for the lower end of the market because their current construction is so far out of compliance that they're going to have the biggest changes they're going to have to make to construction.
Got it.
But the rule talks about more than just construction because it requires a new label, and it's very specific about how that label is placed. And of course, your test sample will have to have that label in it. You're going to have to be conscious to track production dates. There are some companies today that do not put production dates on their furniture. Again, we've got that September 1st deadline date. So you've got to have clear proof that your piece was produced. And it can't just be, an invoice. It's got to be the actual production, label on the product. And there are other labels that may already be on the product that already have that production date on it. But there are some companies that don't have those.
Got it. Got it. And for people who are importing these products, and I'm assuming they would have placed orders for products already. It usually, is placed 3, 4, 5 months in advance. So if the pieces are landing in the United States after September 1st, but they were produced in the factory before September 1st, they still don't have to worry about those pieces at least. Is that correct?
Correct. Correct. Those pieces can still be sold with no issues, other than the fact that the retailers may have some resistance to those older production pieces.
Got it. Got it. So now going to the second order analysis of this, right? So what is going to be the ripple effect of this construction change on cost, on timelines, on source countries? Would love to sort of hear your thoughts on how this is gonna impact different departments across a importer or a manufacturer.
Well, from the manufacturing side, you're going to have stronger, thicker materials, which obviously are going to be more expensive. If you have to increase the size of your case piece, it's going to increase the cubic feet, which is going to increase the size of the carton cost. It's going to increase the shipping expense. If you have to add weight to the back of the piece in order to pass the test, that means you'll probably have to beef up the construction on the interior of the cabinet to prevent damage to the cabinet just by the weight itself during the shipping process pulling itself apart. And again, it's that issue of passing that test. It could easily fail the test because you've added the weight, so now it shouldn't tip, but that extra weight inside of the current construction of the cabinet isn't strong enough to support the weight. So there again, more increased costs. And again, in shipping, when you're shipping a piece that you've now attached a weight to the bottom section of it, there's going to be a greater potential for shipping damage, just as the piece, almost tears itself apart from the inside if you're not careful. So those are all issues that you have to take a hard look at from an engineering point of view to make sure that it, the product can get to the consumer safely. But each one of those changes has a cost associated with it.
Got it. Got it. And so, just hearing all of this, it doesn't seem like there's a quick fix to something that you've already designed. It seems like you'll probably have to
Mm.
look at the design from scratch and just probably cancel that product and just build a new one.
I think a lot of manufacturers and a lot of importers are taking that direction right now where they're saying, let's redesign it. I know a number of people are looking at their nightstands and saying, okay, we're going to make our nightstands 26 and a half inches tall instead of 27 or 28. Um, and in addition to their cabinets, they're looking at, how do we change the construction because the cost increase, I wouldn't say they're going to be large, but they're going to be significant. And to get the retailer to accept that increased cost is going to be a challenge. And so sometimes it's easier to present a new product than it is to revise an existing product.
Makes sense. And Sean, because you've already worked with some companies on these aspects, right? What kind of cost increase uh, broadly have you seen across products?
Well, it really varies quite a bit. The people that are in the more promotional price points have got the greatest amount of cost increase, sometimes as much as 12 to 16%. Pieces that are better built to start with and deeper and have less issues, then the fixes are a little simpler. A little bit of weight to the back of the unit. You shorten the drawer extensions, and there's a couple of other things that you can do that aren't as cost intensive, and they're probably in the 7% range. 6 to 7%. But as I said, the people that are going to be affected the most at cost are those operating in the more promotional price levels.
Got it. Got it. And the products that I already have. So, what advice would you have for wholesalers who already have a lot of these products in the United States, which uh, don't meet the requirement? I think the precursor to that question is: do you recommend that people, get their products which are already in the United States, got here before the act passed, tested, whether they sort of meet the standards or not?
Well, it's pretty easy to replicate the test in-house in your own warehouse or to have your supplier do it in their factory overseas. And that will give you an indication as to whether or not you have a chance of passing the test. My opinion would be anything that is non-compliant. You need to get out of your inventory as early as possible. It's very similar to what happened when we were going into the carb compliance issues with formaldehyde. When we went from phase one to phase two, everyone wanted to get rid of phase one in anticipation of phase two getting in and want to switch to phase two as soon as possible because you just don't want to have inventory that has any kind of a negative when you're in a selling situation.
Sure. If the product is passing the test in house, would it make sense for me to get a real validation for it so that I'm when I'm presenting to my retailers as of today, I don't get a pushback? So do you recommend that they just get a valid test proof?
Well, if your product will actually pass the test, then it makes sense to go ahead and have it tested. The law requires third party certified testing, and there's a list available at the CPSC of the labs internationally that are certified to do this. And once you're certified, then the product you can tell your customers that it's compliant. But the only way that it's certified is if number one, it really has to pass that test for the tip over. It also must include an anti-tip over restraint device that has also passed a test. And then, of course, it has to be properly labeled. So there's really three parts to it.
Got it. And how many products today, as of today, have this device installed?
Oh, gosh. A lot of people have been using devices. The problem is that many of them have been using devices that don't pass the current test.
Got it.
There is a ASTM test for the device, and that device is much stronger than the unit that most people are shipping and currently including with their products. I think a lot of people, in an effort to be somewhat compliant with the voluntary standard, just bought, a cheap plastic piece that, could attach to the wall and could attach to the back of the furniture. And they said, okay, we've got the anti-tip over device. But the truth of the matter is that against the standard for testing for that device, it's meaningless because it doesn't pass the test. So you've got to make sure the device you're using passes the test.
Got it. Got it. And in terms of advice for designers, right? Like, do you have some advice for how they need to sort of go about the product development phase to make sure that whatever they're designing will comply?
Well, they have to be very cognizant of the center of gravity of the piece of furniture. So as you go into more contemporary designs where you may have a base that sits back from the edge of the furniture, so now the drawer box itself sits out over the base, you're already putting yourself in a awkward position to pass a tip over test because you've pushed your center of gravity out past the legs.
Got it.
I mean, the ideal situation would be that you would have your legs extend 2 inches out in front of the case, but by the time you get done with the lawsuits for all the broken toes, as people bump into that outrigger device, you learn pretty quickly that's not going to be the solution. But I think designers are going to be forced into having the legs on the cases be flush with the front or with a slight extension. They're going to have to make sure that the legs go all the way to the back of the case. There's going to be a number of issues that a designer is going to have to take into account because I believe a lot of units will require, particularly taller units, will require the weight in the back, and so then you've got to beef up your case, and it also reduces the how deep your drawer can be because you've now got some of that space inside of the cabinet taken up by a concrete or a metal weight.
Got it. Got it. And what about materials? In terms of the materials that are currently used, are there certain materials that you definitely say no to?
Well, I don't know this. I would definitely say it's materials, but it's types of construction.
Okay.
People that have used thinner MDF panels over a low cost wood frame, those are the people that are going to really struggle to pass the test because the case itself inherently doesn't have a lot of weight and it's distributed over, let's just say that it's 32 inches in height. That light weight is distributed over 32 inches. So it's very easy for that to have a center of gravity that tips forward. There are ways to address that, but I think the law is going to force a lot of the construction to become much more sturdy.
Understood.
In the past, people would build a cabinet because they knew that it was decorative. It was primarily decorative. But unfortunately, now if a consumer looks at it and says, "Oh, I could put that in the bedroom as a nightstand," it would fall under the rules, and therefore you're going to have to put a much stronger construction.
Got it. Got it. I think we can double down on that front, right? Like what, uh, because you might be producing something thinking that this is not for storage or it's a decor piece, and the consumer might use it differently, right? So where's the line drawn there?
That's going to be a very difficult question to answer because I think trying to figure that out is going to be very, very difficult. I think as you get into larger pieces, let's just say like a sideboard for in a dining environment, that's the kind of piece you can look at and say, "Oh, this is definitely not intended for clothing storage." So even though it might, in fact, be very similar to the size of a dresser, it doesn't really have to pass the testing of the rules, the testing or the rules with the tip over. But um, I think anything that's like a three drawer chest or a two drawer chest or some combination of drawers that is probably under 60 inches in width, maybe even as much as 66 inches in width, is, are going to be considered clothing storage units,
Got
by the consumer. And so that those are the ones that you're going to have to be sure, pass. Because as I said before, you can try to be clever and say that, oh, this is a decorative chest or this is a hall chest or this is a small serving piece. Um, if the consumer looks at it and says, oh, I can put, at my child's bedroom for furniture, then if something happens, I think they're going to find you in violation of the rule.
got it. Got it. And what if on the product label I put a disclaimer that this is not supposed to be used for storage?
Mhm.
Will that
I
work?
think that works if you have a piece that's dedicated to like home entertainment, like a TV stand or a TV media storage cabinet or a piece that perhaps with a built-in fireplace. I think on a piece unit like that, you're you'll be safe. But I think there's a lot of gray area. There's a tremendous amount of gray area, and the risk for the fines is, in my opinion, too great.
What kind of fines are we talking about here, Sean?
Well, they really have not come out and set a hard number to it, but, in the past, CPSC, likes to have fines that start off at $10,000, per incident, and could be as much as 100,000. I'm not sure what the final numbers are on this because, they've revised a number of things, but, CPSC, likes their penalties. And the truth of the matter is, even if let's just say you don't even get a fine, but you get a recall, the cost of a recall can go into millions and millions of dollars,
Yeah,
whether it's for 100 units that you shipped, or whether it's for 5,000 units that you shipped.
got it.
I've been involved with recalls with CPSC before, and companies have spent multiple millions of dollars between the advertising, the websites, the replacement parts, the exchanges. It's very, very expensive.
Got it. And Sean, there are multiple countries from where furniture is sort of imported into the United States, and maybe, I mean, of course, China being the largest, but just talk a little bit about what are those source countries and where do you see the highest chance or risk of failure of the test in terms of the materials they use or the construction they use or how compliant the factories usually are.
Well, I think it's hard to say by country.
Okay.
It really depends on the sophistication of the furniture factory involved. The more sophisticated the factory is, with terms of the in-house testing, their knowledge of construction, the materials they use, the less of an issue you're going to have. And again, it comes back to that price level, whether it be China or whether it be Indonesia or whether it be Malaysia or Vietnam. Any of those countries where you're doing a lot of particle board construction, MDF construction, you put yourself at risk because it's going to be very hard to control that center of gravity. You're going to need to add weight. You're going to need to look at other issues. India may have less of an issue because a lot of the product coming out of India today, in this type of product, is solid wood.
Yeah.
It tends to be a little bit larger scale to start with.
Yeah.
It tends to have a lot more weight to it because they'll put heavy steel bases on it, which is an advantage when you go into the testing process because they're not using full extension drawer guides. As the drawer opens, that changes the center of gravity, and because a lot of the Indian companies will use a wood to wood guide, you can put a stop on that that will reduce how far the drawer can open, and that helps you again in that tip over testing.
Got it. Got it. And these tests are locally available in all these countries. That's not something that.
Yes,
Okay.
the labs are everywhere. The labs are everywhere,
Got it.
and in addition to that, the things that the retailers, the wholesalers, the importers, and the manufacturers need to be cognizant of is you need to have documentation of this testing.
Hmm.
You can't just say, "Oh, I passed it." You've got to have a copy of a past test report. It's probably going to be only acceptable for about 12 months from when the test takes place. So every year you have to do annual testing on ongoing products. You'll have to keep those documents on record so that should someone come in and say, I want to see your testing report, not only do you have it, but the importer has it, the retailer has it. And, typically they're looking for, anywhere from 2 to 3 years that you hold those records to prove that you have it,
Got it.
should an investigation be started.
Got it. And is the testing supposed to be done every time there's a fresh batch of production, or it's
No, as long as the design has not changed and the materials have not changed, the testing should be is really only required on the individual style number.
okay?
If you make any modification to the style number, other than let's say color or the style of the hardware, anything that could have any impact on the test results of the item would require a new test. And that's going to be a key as well, as you need to make sure that you have that style number of the unit on that test report, because when you try to show that documentation to CPSC, should they require it, you'll need to make sure that you've got a clear delineation as to which products have been tested and which products have not.
Got it. Got it. And just to make this a little bit more interesting, can you talk about some of the hacks people are thinking about using and why you think they might fail if they use those?
Well, there's several people that think that the solution is to go to a shorter drawer guide,
Okay.
so the drawer won't open so much, and make the drawers at the bottom of the cabinet smaller than the drawers at the top of the cabinet in terms of depth. The idea being, or excuse me, the reverse, the deeper at the bottom and shallower at the top. The idea being that that's going to create less of an issue for it tipping over because the weight, part of the test is the size of the drawer determines the weight that's inside of it. So some people think that by having a smaller drawer, that it'll be easier to pass the test. I don't know that that's going to really work. You can reduce the drawer extension to a certain degree, but then the piece, starts to lose function. And I mean, as a consumer, can you imagine buying a piece of furniture that the drawer opens up like 3 inches? The drawer is, 16 inches deep, but you can only get to 3 or 4 inches of it.
Yeah.
How do you get your clothing in and out of it?
Yeah.
So that'll affect sales. So that some of that they're kidding themselves on. Um, there's other people that have been talking about trying to use an add-on device that would automatically open up, but the problem is that you really can't have a two function, because those devices that pop out that I've had people talk to me about, you have to then release it to put it back in, and the consumers aren't going to do that.
Hmm.
One of the challenges we have right now is that even on the units that we're shipping with an anti-tip over restraint device attached, the consumers aren't using them. So that's why the rule requires you to pass the tip over test without the use of the device, and then add the device to it for extra safety.
Got it. Got it. Got it. Yeah, you can't make changes which will lose its function or value to the consumer. So you have to be sort of careful
Exactly.
about that in your design. Makes sense.
Hmm.
Maybe Sean, we can just summarize what are the requirements of the test again, or just overall what the requirements for the Sturdy Act are again. What are the three, four, five things that people need to be careful about, and then we can sort of move on to some of the impact that this will have on key stakeholders within the industry.
Okay. Well, the key things are, of course, the testing, third-party testing in a certified lab. Having that testing that's clearly documented, and sharing those past test results with you at every stage of it, from manufacturer to importer, wholesaler, retailer. Um, the second thing is the labeling, so that you have the proper safety label inside of the drawer. And the third thing is the anti-restraint device that also has its past test, because you've got to have that to prove that, in fact, the piece is compliant with the law. Those are the three critical things. And of course, the production dates.
In terms of choosing a manufacturer, does this change the manufacturers that I work with at all, or you know, are there any more vetting parameters that I need to add when selecting a new manufacturer for my products?
I don't know that it would really change that aspect of the business. It's going to require that the compliance team inside of every company is very detail oriented about making sure that they've got the testing reports, and that they verify that there are no changes to construction. One of the things you always need to be careful of when you're dealing with a third party manufacturer, someone who is producing in a facility where you're not in it, is that they're going to actually ship what they told you they're going to
Yeah,
ship. There's the famous term, what they call it, a golden sample, and that's a sample that's made and it passed the test reports and it looks wonderful, but production doesn't match that. And so that's going to be important, for the all the QC teams that are out there in the field. You're going to have, I think, logically, a company, to avoid risk, will need to have some sort of domestic inspection process, so that when the product comes into the U.S., they automatically pull it out, and maybe randomly they pull a piece and send it off for testing, here in the U.S.,
yeah,
to confirm that it meets the compliance.
yeah, yeah. And would you also recommend that the QC teams do test during the production phase as well? Like just pick up a piece
What
during
You
midline.
really can't you really can't do it during the production until the piece is fully produced. Once the piece is fully produced, I absolutely suggest that every factory should be doing some in-house testing. They should set up their own, maybe it's obviously not a certified lab, but they should set up their own internal laboratory space, so that they can do that test and confirm that, there's been no change to it that's caused a problem. If your drawer guide manufacturer changes a specification and you don't catch it, could that affect the tip over? I mean, it's possible.
Yeah,
So there's going to be a lot of diligence that's going to be required to make sure that you're not, potentially exposing yourself to risk. And when that happens, the publicity of those recalls is
yeah,
horrendous to a business.
yeah, yeah. Makes sense. So moving on from this to just stakeholders within a company, right? So I think we should just sort of talk about how this impacts the production teams and the procurement teams uh, at a wholesaler or a manufacturer.
Well, the production team, obviously, knowing the materials, knowing you're passing the testing, confirming all of that. Um, the Procurement team is going to really have to make sure that they've first got that guarantee that they're going to, be compliant, confirm they've got the documentation, set up systems so that they can maintain easy access to that documentation. Because if CPSC, shows up in your showroom space or wherever they come, and they decide that they want to take a look at that information, you've got to have that readily available to them. So it can't be the sort of thing where you say, "Oh, quick, let's get hold of the factory over in India and have us get a copy of that test report." Or, gosh, we didn't check the fact that this test report is 18 months old. It needs to be 12 months or less. Those are the kinds of things that the production team is really going to have to watch. And frankly, the sales team is going to have to be involved in this, because they're going to need to be able to talk to their customers about the situation, what's going on with the rules, and their company's efforts to comply with the rules. It's going to become, there's a selling aspect to this as well,
Yeah.
as particularly when you get to something that's as industry wide as a rule like this.
Yeah. Yeah. And for people who do it better before in time will sort of have a competitive advantage till other people catch up, right? Like,
For sure, and I think the people that continue to dig at this, as we go through the production process and as you start passing the tests, you're going to find that there's maybe more efficient ways or maybe more unique ways to pass it. I mean, I'm involved right now with some projects with some industrial engineers working on a mechanism that would automatically prevent the piece from tipping over and would pass all of the tests.
interesting.
Um, it's a challenge because there's a lot of issues to it, and we're in the prototype phase now. I'm not sure how long that will last, but um, each time you do it and each time you build a prototype, you'll find there's a way to do it better. And that's been true of the furniture industry for hundreds of years. People keep finding ways to improve it. We all thought full extension drawer guides was a great benefit to the industry until we found out that by having the drawers stick all the way out, it increased the tip over risk.
Mm.
It was one of those things we thought, oh, what a great consumer selling tool! You have full access to the drawer,
Yeah.
not even thinking about the fact that you've now made the drawer, that cabinet, so much easier to tip over.
Sean, I think we covered the entire podcast, but we never talked about why this act is good for the consumer. So why pass this act, right?
It's the safety of children. I've been a fanatic about that. I have children. I have grandchildren. I had a case where my children have, I think, every piece of furniture in our home, short of the sofa, is screwed to the wall or the floor. And my one of my grandsons was in a visiting with a cousin, and they had a chest of drawers, an older chest of drawers, fall over, and luckily the two children, neither one of them was injured. Some bumps and bruises and things like that. But immediately, the first thing my daughter did, and it was her sister in law's house, was she went, took out the top drawer of the cabinet, went out to their garage, got a drill and screws, and she screwed it into the wall. And her sister in law thanked her for it,
Yeah.
because of this. You get so scared as parents, and I think anything we can do to protect the children is important. That it used to be we had this issue with TVs
Yeah.
tipping over when TVs weighed a lot. Now people mount the TVs to the wall, so that part of injuries has really gone down. Unfortunately, the furniture tipping over has increased dramatically, and there's a lot of product that was shipped over many years that would not meet these current rules. It'll take a long time before that product's out of the field.
So if you want to just say any parting words, any piece of advice that you want to give to our listeners, factories, manufacturers, wholesalers, designers, on what they need to do right now.
Well, the advice that I would give to the people in our industry right now is to move on this at once. Don't wait. The sooner you have a plan in place for how you're going to make sure that your products are in compliance, the better off it will be for your business. The quicker your sales force can tell your customers, "Oh, we've already reacted to this," the more confidence that your customer base will have in you. Um, the Any business at any given time is exposed to risk, and a prudent person minimizes the risk. And this is an opportunity to get on it fast, get your inventory correct, and have your product be safe in the marketplace and be able to tout that as a feature. That's a tremendous selling feature. Our product meets or exceeds every safety requirement out there. The confidence when a salesperson can say that to his customers is tremendous, and it really has an impact on sales.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Sean, for taking out time and
Okay.
speaking to us on this topic. We in future might do a deep dive with you to cover some of these things in detail. But thank you so much, and we really appreciate your input.
Well, thanks. Glad to be involved.